Okay, I think we're live here. All right, well, welcome everybody. We're coming from all over the world on this one. I'm sitting here in Brazil, and I want to say good evening, or maybe good night shortly. My name is Kevin Jaramillo, and welcome to see you guys again.
I'm Greg Pereira. I'm here in Arizona, and yeah, good to see you all.
Yeah, I'm Bret in Singapore. I just woke up.
So some of us are going to bed and some are just waking up.
That's about right.
So we're going to just jump right in. And one of the questions that was asked of me today, guys, is, at the secondary level, and even as low as the 6th through 12th grade, they were asking, why don't we have a high-level math class, maybe that split, and we'll have a lower level and an advanced level. Some other schools that people have worked at have that. And so the question came about, my population is about 85% local national Brazilian, and about 15 plus, or give or take, is national from all over the world. We do run two tracks. We want to run the national track, which that math is a little bit different. It is taught in Portuguese. And then we have a regular international track where students take more of the curriculum that's U.S. with the algebra, the geometry, the algebra 2, pre-calc, etc. So, but in both of those, they were asking, like, why don't we have a place for these students who are not being fully challenged, or, it makes it more complex in a classroom. So we'd love some thoughts on where you guys stand on that.
Yeah, I kind of talked about this in a couple of our assignments so far, as far as tracking goes. I'll try and keep this video below, 30 minutes or so. So
perfect. Okay.
You guys can just go to sleep now, and then I'll be done. I talked about the tracking issue, especially when it comes to math. It seems like the most common way that we've all experienced this situation. And I guess in math, it's okay. It's that feeling of it's okay if you're not good at math. So I don't know. I'm really happy that I got tracked in math, that I didn't end up in some really high level math that discouraged me from school and made me feel like I was not good enough for school. And I'm really happy that some of my friends ended up in a really high level math. So I think I think tracking as far as ability levels does make some sense, especially as you get into the higher grade levels. I think we probably started tracking in once some kids went into I remember some kids went into pre-algebra and some kids went into algebra, and I went into pre-algebra, and basically I get where they're coming from. That defined my math life, but that was probably an appropriate place for me to be. I needed to go into pre-algebra. I did not need to go into algebra yet. I needed some time. So I don't know how at the younger levels I get some of the feelings there, but I think as you get older, tracking does make some sense. Yeah.
Are you thinking grade 8, 9, or is there a preference, or is there?
Well, I don't know. Even beyond math, though, I've written a couple of times about my little brother who got tracked out of mainstream school in general and got tracked into the vocational center and ended up in graphic design courses, and basically that saved his life as well. So I don't know. I don't see all negative things with tracking kids. I do see at a younger level, I see some of the concerns, but I do think there is some validity to saying we're not all born equal. We are not all born with the same levels of whatever. Some people might say intelligence, some people may say ability, but no matter what we do to say we want to create an equal opportunity or an equal achievement, we're not all coming to school with the same opportunities. We're not all coming to school with the same levels of abilities. And if school just says like, oh, we're on the same track, then I don't know if that's actually like fair. Like, just because we say like everybody's in the same course and doing the same things, like, is that fair? So that's one of the things that I struggle with is, you know, I mean, I teach kids with special needs, and I think like it's not actually fair if even at like grade 3 or grade 2, like sometimes like not everybody just ends up in the same class. Like, just like I don't work at NASA. Like, I'm just not ready. Like, it's not my thing. Like, I don't know. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Yeah.
So I'll share the other side of it because I've been on the other side before. So when I was a student early on, elementary level, came from a household, spoke Portuguese at home primarily, got to school right off the bat, struggled heavily with reading and with math. And so tracking, benchmarking, even going back a couple chapters to standardized testing, the solution for me was to move me into remedial or even special education. And it wasn't so much moving into a lower level class that was the challenge. It was what I had to sacrifice and give up as an elementary student to do it, because they don't take you out of the existing math time and just move you to a lower level class. They leave you in that class, and then when it's history or science or creative arts or another area you really want to do, that's when they take you out for extra math help. And so what ends up happening, at least in my case, and the challenge was, you start to only identify school with your struggles because you're never getting an opportunity to do the things you're good at. You know, you could be a creative type. You could be a musical savant. God knows I'm not. But you could be a musical savant. And you never have an opportunity to express it because that time is seen as disposable. So that's not as critical. You pull students out at that point and put them somewhere else. I think it was chapter 8 or 9 earlier in the book that actually did a really good job of describing that as being one of the risks of at a certain point when you hold everyone to the same standard. And I guess actually in a way, Brett, I'm kind of feeding into what you're saying. When you try and hold everyone to an automatic standard of where they should be, that's the risk you run, is all of a sudden you have an inferiority complex. And it's ironic for me because, you know, the kid that was put in special ed that was pulled away from all those things, you know, I'm dean of instruction now at a college. Like,
right.
Who knew? You know, who saw that coming? But it's really interesting how some of those effects can take place. And on the other end, I've certainly been in classes where, you know, maybe I'm really good at something and other people aren't, and I want to be challenged more. And it's boring for me to sit through there and things that I know or that I've already learned. So it's really a fine line. But for me, the question is just always, is it a clean line of varying levels of a subject, or does it affect other areas? And that was kind of, even Kevin, when you were describing some of the, it's math, but it's also civics and it's for English learners and sometimes it's blended. That's always my challenge when I think about those things is, what are we potentially taking students away from that they're really good at, and what can be sacrificed as part of it?
And I think I'd agree with both of you guys. And I, you know, just thinking about it and saying, if we can identify especially the area that has the deficit, because if we're tracking, doesn't mean we're tracking for every single subject. We're tracking one subject, maybe there's others, and, you know, it just depends where that student is. But I think, you know, because we're not, the student's not gifted in mathematics, doesn't mean he's not or she's not in English or in another subject where she could or he could be in a higher level course at that time. And quickly, on chapter 12, Carolyn Tyson speaks that curriculum differentiation is supposed to benefit all students because, in theory, it enables teachers to meet the particular needs of students by grouping them with others of similar ability and preparation. And I think, like, with that small definition or clarity, that's exactly how it should be used when you go outside those parameters and you're using it for a special ed class when it's not a need of that, but rather just a need to get the student back to grade level.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think tracking is just one of the many things that kind of come up throughout this book, as far as whether they're mechanisms or ways that some of the authors feel like schools either hurt kids or, miss, don't provide like the same opportunities to kids. And I think, I take your point quite well, actually, Greg. Like the school I used to work in, like, all of those kids sacrificed time in art class and math and PE class, or whatever the class was, whatever, I don't know, like these classes that are actually like kids are actually passionate about, to go to what they would call intensive reading class or intensive math, and it was like the whole school, like, the whole school day for some of the low performing schools is built on like, oh, if we just give more reading, or if we just give more math or whatever. And I think we definitely missed the point there. Like, so like to your point, Greg, like, you're definitely right. Like, as a kid maybe who struggles reading, sometimes the last thing I need is more reading. If that makes sense. So I need something that like I actually care about, that allows me to go into my reading class or into my math class and feel like this school cares about me and cares about my needs. And, like my whole day, like, I don't want to spend my whole day doing something that I'm not like comfortable with or good at, or, like if I do that all day, every day, day after day, year after year, like, I'm going to continue to perform poorly at that. Like, I have to experience success, and I don't necessarily have to experience success in math. Like be a normal person. And to your point, Greg, like, well taken. Like, you're right. Like, tracking in that degree, like, does not create like equal opportunity. So one of the ways that like we used to create an equal opportunity was to say, here's more math, because then you can catch up with everyone else. And then we gave you an equal opportunity. And like, it just doesn't feel like that's actually an equal opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think where I give some grace and flexibility, and where I've mentioned this before in some of the other forums, that I really think intent is often a missing piece when we have these discussions, because the way a lot of it's written is, we're segregating on purpose and we're doing all these things to kids. I don't think anyone that pulled me out of the things I was good at to put me in remedial math was trying to harm me. I think the intent was good. It was, you need math, you're struggling in it, we want to get you up to par. But your point is well taken. And, what I'll say is it's just small wins, right? We all need those small wins on a daily basis. And I speak at several events from time to time that people invite me to, and it's always interesting. I was actually we have programs in one of the prisons here in Arizona where we do vocational training. And so it's interesting because I have a chance to share my story sometimes, and my story, as opposed to the inmates, they were all bad at those classes. They were all moved into those remedial special ed classes. They all felt like they were an overall failure because there was nothing at school that they were good at. I'm the exception to the rule, and I don't lose sight of that on a daily basis. But again, that's not to say that all tracking is bad. I think there are a lot of instances where people need to stay challenged, but it does get back to what the book has discussed, which is, what do those opportunities actually look like? If they're equal opportunities where the opportunity gap is closed, that's an okay thing. If we're actually widening the gap as a result, then that's the real challenge. So I wouldn't say ever that tracking is bad or good. It's just really consideration has to be given to how it's being implemented and how it affects the students on both sides of that spectrum.
I think that was stated on page 267. And I'm hoping I'm quoting this right, but it says, indeed, some scholars argue that tracking is one of the main mechanisms of social reproduction in the United States. Efforts to close the achievement gap must address the opportunity gap. Mm-hmm. And I think when you do limit a student, it could cause that social gap to become larger. I don't know. The book talked about it in the same chapter, and it was just saying, like, when you start putting them in these, remedial, maybe lower classes, what's the stigma? And like you're saying, with those that have been incarcerated, they're saying, yeah, I was that student, and that's why, or You saying, yeah, I was that student, and this is why.
Right.
So it's a good point.
I mean, not to take up like the whole time talking about tracking, but I think it is a good way for us to like discuss the opportunity gap in general. Like, I mean, it's a really broad concept that we're trying to like kind of get at and discuss, and we could probably spend, well, at least I could, as we all know, like forever talking about it. But like, I mean, like, there is something to be said about like, we're looking at like the reason why kids end up getting tracked or getting tracked into like situations that are actually like that we all know, like it's not good for a kid to spend, you know, extra class periods outside of elective courses or art class or math class or PE class or health class, whatever, like to do extra reading or extra math, like, but those are all like actually like mandated by the government. Like, it's not like some teacher like sitting in that class that's just like, oh yeah, like I really believe that this kid should spend, you know, 90 minutes a day in reading class instead of 45. Like, these are all like policies that are implemented by a government that doesn't actually like account for like what it means to be like a 14-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid. Like, I don't think like you would walk into any school in the world for that matter and you would talk to a teacher that thinks that like these are good policies. And I guess like where I always get caught up is like yes, our government or our states, our local governments like have created policies that are not for the benefit of kids, but they're for the benefit of people that say like, no, look at what we did. We mandated that they give extra time to reading for kids that don't pass this test. Mm-hmm. And I guess like where I always get caught up is then we look to the same government and say, come on, government, like fix it. And I don't know like how to balance that feeling of like, it's the government that screwed this up. It's government policies that continue to perpetuate these situations that we all like, we can all sit in this class and we would all be like, yes, we know like of situation where kids should not be tracked in this way or be put in that class. And yet then we look to the government to say like, oh, like, come on, government, fix it for us. Like, the government screwed it up. And then we like say like, come on, government, fix it. I don't know like how to balance that feeling of like, how do you ask the very like thing or people that continue to mess things up and say like, fix it for us?
Well, I think it creates an infinitely regressive cycle where they dictate policy, then we come back and ask for more policy, and it just goes on and on. I think it's an interesting point you make too about what they've dictated to be important. I think back at high school math classes that I was never very good at, but how often I use algebra and geometry, next to never, as opposed to emotional intelligence, problem solving, skills like that everyone uses universally in the workplace. And that, to your point, Brett, which I guess I really hadn't thought about that directly, of well, who decided that wasn't important or who decided that wasn't as important, because we use those skills much more frequently, and every job requires problem solving and emotional intelligence, which are, essentially just completely ignored. The book had some good information in chapter 13 about how to get great schools and teachers, and they talked about some of the realities of teacher pay and creating school conditions across the board. But something that didn't come up was that even if you're trying to do those things, but you're battling against federal legislation that you're mandated to do, I think there's a limit to it. You can have great salary scales and you can give very good and clear preparation and instruction to new teachers. But if we're mandating, strictly, math or math and English, your job is dependent on whether or not your students test accordingly. And that's a very dangerous precedent we've set. So I guess it comes back to, would any of those, obviously they would make a small improvement in a lot of schools, but without some sort of legislative changes, I don't know how far things can really go to help close the opportunity gap.
I think that's why charters or schools are saying, hey, give us a crack at it. because we don't need to follow that as closely as you guys do. And I know we can do a better job than you guys do. And I'm not saying that's always the case, and I'm not even pro or against the charter, but I think that's when someone like who has maybe some money to back it up or wants to say, I can do a little bit better, for sure, give me a shot at this game, steps forward. And now we can see how many schools that are out there in California alone, if we will, in the charter and magnet schools, and all these other people saying, we know we can do better. We know that you just give us that opportunity. But again, I think it's not free. It's not someone going, yeah, we've got this 100% and we can do whatever we want. And so it goes back down to, we're still tied, and when as much as we want to, and we've thrown money at it and we've done this, we're still kind of tied to the system.
I think you bring up I don't know how you guys felt like reading like throughout this book. Like I'm consistently surprised at the anti-charter school feeling throughout like just this book. I'm not saying I'm either for or against charter schools, but it does throughout this book, I had written down a couple of pages. I'm on the Kindle, so there's no telling like what page you're actually on. But where charter schools are continuously like lumped together with high stakes testing, privatization, like this whole it's just charter schools can't be the answer. The only answer for kids to close the opportunity gap is it can't be charter schools. It has to continue to be the public education school system. I was to be honest, I was obviously disappointed with what I felt like throughout all these different authors, all these preeminent scholars in education. And I felt like nobody really brought up anything outside of what has already occurred. It was we got to back teacher unions. We got to get rid of charter schools. We got to, stop high stakes testing. It was just, there was not please, if anybody, if either of you guys has anything that's I just felt like I felt nothing innovative throughout the whole book. It was basically keep everything that we have, get rid of anything that's been new or different. And I just feel I'm not saying certainly there's some validity to private schools and charter schools and school choice. And certainly we have to start thinking beyond just the same old thing. It sucks that teachers leave highly impoverished schools and move to the suburbs and go to these white schools. But just saying we got to get more teachers is not an innovative idea. We got to get better teachers. We got to get more veteran teachers. None of those things are innovative in any way. And I just remember, I just felt when I finished the book, I closed it and I went, and now what? How do we actually close the opportunity gap? It cannot be just more of the same, protect teacher colleges and close down alternative ways for teachers to get certified. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts as far as did you feel any of how do we actually close the opportunity gap? You read this whole book, and then are we any closer?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that the answer has to be innovative necessarily. Sometimes there's simple answers to complex problems. So, I wasn't necessarily looking for innovation, but what I can say is that I thought it was much more compelling, some of the earlier readings in the semester about when parent groups came together and organized, and that's when change actually took place. It was not only demanding school improvements, but also they came in and supported teachers. They were volunteering in classrooms and things like that. And, it's challenging because I think we've all agreed there are federal regulation issues that are to blame and that are a problem. Mm-hmm. But there's also the opportunity of when communities come together. I'm not even saying organizing like protest. Communities legitimately come together, parent groups come together and improve upon their community. There was a little brief mention in chapter 2 referring to Asian students, but I think we've addressed several times, and I think Dr. Sampson even sent out an email that in a lot of these materials, Asian students aren't discussed. They're sort of neglected because they don't meet necessarily the criteria we're looking for, but it's an example of a minority group who is largely still segregated, who there are still certainly pockets of heavy poverty, who have a community that is very, very expecting when it comes to education. They're very engaged. They expect their children and their community to produce geniuses and scholars. My wife's Asian, so we talk about our experience all the time. And so it's really interesting because in addition to that federal regulation piece, I guess a radical argument I would make, Bret, to your point, is what are we doing as parents and as community members to improve upon the school? And in some cases, it's making demands and expectations. But what I loved about that Parent Power video was that they started going into the classroom to help. And at first, the teachers were so put off by it, like, why are you here? What are you trying to examine? But and of course, the opportunity for parents to do that varies greatly across socioeconomic class. And obviously, a middle class stay-at-home parent has a much more time to do that than somebody else. But it just seems like that importance of community and of expectations really has to be part of the equation.
I hear what you both are saying, and I'm just thinking the same too. I don't know that it gave us a lot of answers, but gave us a lot of maybe questions. I think what it did for me was it made me start to say, is that true? Can this really be done, or which way can it be solved? And then talking about the parents, I just had a parent today come in and was just like, can I give you a little feedback? And that was the whole thing. And I was just like, how do you take that? 100 times out of none, you're like, this is not going to end well. But then, I just said, if I don't listen, there might be something worth hearing. And it was a great conversation today saying, during our IEP last week, I was really kind of put off on this part of the IEP that's written in this part. And she was, just kind of saying if we were to organize it different and if I can have some more input on this. And it was really good. And it was a big takeaway. I think it was a win for the school because, she could have been the naysayer and saying, they don't know how to do it. And this is, crap, and don't trust them, or, it could have been that person. But instead she, said, hey, do you have time to listen? And we did, and we sat down, and it was a good takeaway. So I think you're right. I think of that community involvement to make schools better because we know their students pretty well, but do we really know them as well as some of these parents? And at international schools, and maybe any national, any school, maybe the parents not involved, but those that are, we've got to kind of open our ears and our hearts to say, okay, you do know your son or daughter. How can we help? So.
Yeah, I think all that is exactly right. And that goes back to like what you were even saying, Greg, about like emotional intelligence. Like it is not like closing the opportunity gap is not limited to by any means like any solution, any one solution here or all the solutions offered in this book. Like I think we, as teachers, as schools, as parents, we have to address emotional intelligence. We have to address like what we actually care about as a society and like what we value and like, is it worth it? That's my alarm to wake up. So
we're just getting started.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So no, I think I take what you guys are saying. Like, it's everything. Like, it can't be limited to trying to protect even like what we have. Like, and sometimes I guess maybe like I was a bit like put off by what I felt like was a bit of like protectionism. Like, oh, we got to protect like our jobs as teachers or our jobs as educators or our schools as university professors in teachers colleges. Like, I think we have to be maybe a little bit more open-minded to whatever works for kids, and whether that's a charter school, whether that's a home school, whether that's an online school, whether that's, I don't know, no school or a training school, or if a kid's 16, that he has the ability to make some different choices with his life that like he wants and needs. And like, it can't just be about investing. Like, to me, equal opportunity is not just like at 4 years old, everybody comes in with the same level of education. But to me, equal opportunity means even that, like, at 16 or at 18 or at 20, everybody has an equal opportunity to make a choice about what they want to do and how they want to try and get the most out of their life. And like, I kind of said something to Dr. Sampson earlier in the semester about, like, we haven't really discussed this opportunity, like what is equality or what is equal and what is equal opportunity. Like, it's more of a philosophical debate and than it is just like some like standard notion, like, oh, this is what equal opportunity is. And we can't just like look that up in the dictionary and just say, this is what it is. So maybe that's why this is such a broad topic. It's so hard to discuss. Like, we probably would never come to a consensus on like, if you could even achieve equal opportunity. If you could even close the opportunity gap. Like, we all come to school with, like, you can't, like, everybody comes with something different. We all have a different set of parents. We all have a different background. We all have a different everything. Like, we can never come to school with an equal opportunity.
Well,
But
you raise a really good point. And on the one hand, we want to close the opportunity gap for students. And at the same time, as a parent, my goal is kind of to make sure my kid has the most opportunity to be successful possible. So to your point, even if the schools are equal and the opportunities at school are equal, I read with my son every night, right? Right off the bat, he has an advantage going in. But where does that come from? My wife and I both get off at 5. We can afford books. We make the time. And so that kind of gets back to more of those social problems, going back to like Anyon, and talking about how there are such broader social issues that affect education. It's never just education in the education system. It could be equal, whatever that means. To your point, Brett, it could be equal, but it still wouldn't necessarily close the opportunity gap, because there are going to be parents that have more time to spend with their kids, that come from a higher education background, that can help with homework. And so maybe it's not ever possible to achieve, or maybe it's just a product of those social issues that affect the way that things work. But it's a really interesting conversation to have.
I agree with you guys. It's almost that wicked problem that it's unsolvable, maybe because of, like you said, like, you could take your kid to the Grand Canyon and they'll know what that is when they're studying in that textbook, where you give another student that opportunity and they don't have a clue how deep that really is or what that breeze really feels like on the rib. So yeah, absolutely. So guys, we're kind of wrapping it up right now. I think we're hitting maybe marker 30. I know that Brett's just warming up, but we've got to maybe close her down. So any final words and thoughts that you guys might have?
So this is the end of the official video, and then Brett's going to give commentary.
yeah, I'll put part 2 up, and I'll post part 2 later.
That's perfect. This was a really good discussion. Thank you guys for it.
Yeah, always good though. Thanks, guys.
It was a good discussion. Appreciate you guys' thoughts.
You too.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.